Did you know the U.S. is the largest consumer and producer of pecans in the world? It's
I eat
true.
about half.
Do you really?
I'm
You're a big
responsible for half.
pecan eater? Each
Just
of
the
us
pie.
eat about half a pound of pecans each year.
Yeah, and climate change is threatening the major crops, so there is a group of scientists working to make them more climate resilient. We got Dr. Lenny Wells joining us from the University of Georgia. Dr. Wells, thanks so much for being with us. So before we get into, I guess, modifying the pecan, tell us what the threats are as, you know, our climate is shifting.
Well, the issue that we see is, of course, here in the southeastern U.S., we've got issues with, of course, tropical storms, hurricanes coming in, weather patterns late in the season, closer to our harvest period. Out in the West, you've got issues with drought, soil salinity, and those types of issues.
And Molly McCollum, who is our meteorologist on the show, is a fellow UGAer, and she was saying that, you know, Georgia was a leader, but after Hurricane Michael, did the state change of who's the leader of pecan producers?
Actually, we did drop off for a year or so in our production. And normally what happens with hurricanes is the year right after a hurricane, that following year, you have a pretty bad off crop where you don't have much of a crop at all. It takes a year or so for the trees to recover, and then that next year they come back with pretty much a huge crop, and that's what we saw. So we're back in that top position now.
That's impressive. That it's such a quick turnaround.
I know. I should have asked you this in the beginning. In the industry, is it pecan or pecan?
That's a good question. I get that quite often. One of the best answers I've heard of that is that when they are $2 a pound or more, they're pecans, and when they're 50 cents a pound, they're pecans.
That's great.
That's hilarious.
All right, you're part of the team at UGA that's working to adapt these pecans. So how exactly do you adapt these nuts?
Well, we have a pecan breeder here at the University of Georgia, Dr. Pattrn, who is breeding new pecan cultivars, new pecan varieties. Of course, one of the issues with that he's trying to find is to develop pecans with good disease resistance. Of course, here in the Southeast, we have a lot of rain. That brings on a lot of disease for us. So he's breeding pecan varieties with better genetics for resistance to disease. I'm working on a process called hedge pruning, where we prune those trees in such a way that it creates a more compact tree, smaller tree. We've seen that helps reduce the impact of wind injury for pecans, and also makes them more efficient with the water they use.
I've always been interesting when you guys kind of modify something that's, you know, out there, whether nature provides it or whatnot. Do I, as a consumer, need to ever worry about if you change this, the nutritional factor or anything like that?
No. This is the breeding that's being done on pecans is not, you're not looking at like genetically modified organisms or anything. You're looking at classical plant breeding, which is something that's been done for thousands of years, where people identify traits in certain parent plants, and they breed those to create a stronger offspring.
So what do we stand to lose if we don't help pecans adapt to the changing climate? Is it we're going to lose them altogether, or we're going to start growing them farther north?
I don't know. Pecans generally have they're pretty adaptable. Their native range runs from deep into Mexico on up along the Mississippi River into Indiana, Illinois, even southern Iowa. So along that region, there's a lot of course, different climate that they're exposed to. So there's a lot of different environmental conditions, and they're very well adapted to a wide range of conditions. What we're trying to do is just make it where we can have the right varieties and the right management practices to make pecans profitable for growers.
And, you know, this research that you're doing, do you guys hope that maybe this is going to help other crops than just pecans?
Some of those issues certainly are going to impact other crops. We're pretty focused here on pecans.
Do you like pecan pie?
I do, but I try to eat pecans more as snacks because it's much more healthy than eating pecan pie.
I know, so true.
Are these trees, do they use a lot of water? I feel like almond trees use a lot of water.
Yeah, most tree nuts are relatively heavy water users. With pecans, it's only a kind of a small window during the growing season. Right at the tail end of the growing season is when the peak water demand is, and so you've got about a 3-week period there where they use a pretty good bit of water. The rest of the season, it's not nearly as much, and we're kind of ramping up and as the season goes along. But the hedge pruning that I mentioned certainly helps minimize the amount of water that we have to use to grow pecans. It makes them much more efficient with the use of that water.
Right on. Dr. Lenny Wells from the University of Georgia, thank you so much for your time and the pecan one-on-one class that we just
and
went
the
through.
debate,
I learned
right?
so much.
That's why I love this show, because I never would have
Me neither.
known or learned
How
so
much you pay for that? Oh, you got pecans. Okay.